Let's go ahead and get started. Not a good game. St. Francis, Akron, 6 o'clock Eastern kickoff on Thursday, September 1st, 2022. Now, this game's currently off the board, and even though the Akron Zips had a down year last season, they did finish the year with a handful of covers. Now, they covered against the likes of Western Michigan, Ball State, and Miami, Ohio, and in those covers, this Akron offense averaged over 30 points a game. Running back John Zell Norris, he averaged just about 5 yards a carry last season. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, the other side of the ball, defensive leader Charles Amankwa had 9 PDs, 3 interceptions, and 44 total tackles on the year. So I'm really not concerned about, where this line comes out at. I think Akron should be able to get the job done against St. Francis of Pennsylvania. So I'm going to go ahead and lean toward the Zips covering the number. Next game, West Virginia taking on Pitt, 7 o'clock Thursday night. The Pitt Panthers are -8, totals 51. Now, the markets did move toward Pitt a little bit. We also saw a 3-point move toward the under on the total. But despite winning the conference last season, Pitt does lose all-conference quarterback Kenny Pickett. Top receiver Jordan Addison, he also transferred out of Pittsburgh. They're taking on a West Virginia team on the other side, who actually won 4 out of their final 7 contests in 2021. They beat the likes of TCU, Iowa State, and Texas during that span. Now, they're also going to get back sack leader Dante Steele, who had 7 sacks on the season last year, along with a forced fumble. Now, when it comes to the total, the Mountaineers saw 6 out of their final 10 contests last season fall under the number. Meanwhile, Pitt finished the year with 3 straight unders themselves. I'm going to go ahead and lean toward West Virginia +8, keeping this one close, and the under 51. All right, next ball game I have for you, it is going to be South Carolina State taking on UCF. That's going to be a 7 o'clock Eastern start time Thursday evening. Now, this is another one of those games that's off the board. A lot of these games here early in the week, not going to have lines set. Many of them, the books aren't even going to put out a line for them because they're just so lopsided. But this is another one off the board. But anyway, UCF, they won 6 out of their final 7 ball games last season. And that includes a bowl win over Florida. Now, during that stretch I just mentioned, this Central Florida defense was fairly dominant. They allowed just 11 points a game in their victories during that time frame I just mentioned. Tremont Morris Brash had 5 sacks last season, along with 50 tackles. And speaking of tackles, Quadric Bullard finished the year with 84 tackles, along with 3 fumble recoveries. Now, they're taking on an SC State squad who lost to programs last year such as NC Florida A&M, and Alabama A&M. They also allowed a total of 92 points in their losses to Clemson and New Mexico State. I'm going to lean toward Central Florida getting the job done against the number. All right, next ball game, Long Island University, LIU taking on Toledo, 7 o'clock Thursday. Now, I played Division II football back in the day, and we played LIU. They were actually called CW Post, about 15 to 20 years ago, give or take. But anyway, LIU Toledo, 7 o'clock Thursday. No numbers set yet for this game. Now, Toledo had little problems moving the football last year against the MAC. They won their final 3 conference ball games, and they averaged over 44 points a game in those victories. DeQuad Finn threw for 18 touchdowns last season, and he only had 2 interceptions, so he did a nice job protecting the football. Meanwhile, on the ground, the dual-threat quarterback rushed for 4.5 yards a carry and 9 more scores rushing. Now, they're scoring off against an LIU team who lost their last 3 straight last year, and they had difficulties offensively for most of the year. And as a matter of fact, the Sharks were held to 14 points or less in 7 games last year. So I'm going to go ahead and lean toward the Toledo Rockets getting the job done against the number. Next ball game, Central Michigan, Oklahoma State, 7 o'clock Thursday. Oklahoma State's minus 21 totals 59. And if you like Central Michigan in an upset win, they're plus 775 for some money line cash. And if your total's better, we actually did see a 1.5 point move toward the over in this one. And despite having a real strong season last year in the MAC, the Chippewas were beating up on teams like Ball State, Kent State, and the other directional Michigans. Now, the Chippewas also suffered outright losses to the likes of Northern Illinois and Miami, Ohio. And despite their success, Central Michigan had significant problems often on defense. They allowed 27 points or more in 7 out of their last 10 ball games. They're also facing an Oklahoma State team who was just half a yard away from being the Big 12 champs. They had 4 plays to score. I don't know how they didn't get in, but anyway, they also put up 37 points in a bowl game victory over Notre Dame. Now, quarterback Spencer Sanders, he threw for over 2,800 yards last year and rushed for nearly 5 yards a carry. And aside from 20 touchdown passes, the QB also ran it in 6 times. Now, the Cowboys also played some very tough defense for much of the 2021 season, and for the exception of the bowl game, Oklahoma State held their opponents to 24 points or less in 8 out of their final 9 contests last year. Colin Oliver had 11.5 sacks from the edge. Meanwhile, Brock Martin had 9 sacks and 41 tackles himself. Central Michigan's definitely going to have a tough time blocking these guys if they look to throw the football. Now, total-wise, OK State did see 3 out of their final 5 contests last year get over the line. Meanwhile, Central Michigan saw overs last year against the likes of Kansas State, Western Michigan, and Kent State, Western Michigan, and Northern Illinois. I'm going to lean toward OK State, minus 21, over 59. Next game, Bryant, FIU, 7 o'clock Thursday. This game's off the board. Now, the Bryant Bulldogs did get themselves a handful of wins last year. They even put up 36 points on Brown University in a 7-point win back in October. Now, this was a team who had little problems moving the football in a lot of their games. They're facing a Florida International team who played some of the worst defense in the country last year. They allowed over 44 points a game in their last 10 outings, and they actually couldn't move the football to boot. I've got to imagine that this number is going to open up a little bit too high. Probably going to see a big number here. Bryant should be catching points. I can't see how they're not going to be catching points. I think they're going to be catching a considerable amount of points. So give me Bryant catching the points and covering the number. All right, next ball game, Ball State, Tennessee, 7 o'clock Thursday night. Tennessee's 34.5, total 68. Markets like the Vols in the over in this one. Half a point move on both numbers. And as high as this number is, Tennessee had no issues lighting up the scoreboard last year. They averaged 41 points a game in their final 9 contests of 2021. They also have quarterback Hendon Hooker, who completed over 68% of his passes and threw for 31 touchdowns. Now, Hooker also rushed for another 620 on the ground, and he threw only 3 interceptions all season, so he did a great job protecting the football, through the air. Now, his favorite target, Cedric Tillman, he also had over 1,000 yards receiving, along with 12 touchdowns. And even though the Vols defensively, they weren't all that stout, they do return starting linebacker Jeremy Banks, who had 128 tackles. That's a big number. That's a lot of tackles. That's a lot of contact. Now, they're taking on a Ball State team who failed to cover in 5 out of their final 6 contests last season. They also allowed over 33 points a game in those failures to cover. Now, the Vols could put up 35 in the first half alone. I'm going to go ahead and lean toward Tennessee, minus 34.5, laying the huge number in the over 68. Next game, VMI taking on Wake Forest, 7:30 East. For those who don't know, VMI, that is the Virginia Military Institute. No number yet for this game, but regardless of what it is, Wake Forest had one of the most prolific offenses in the country last year. They scored 37 points or more in 8 out of their final 10 ball games. They also put up 41 on Boston College, 45 on NC State, and 70 on the Army Black Knights. Army could not stop them in that game. Now, quarterback Sam Hartman threw for over 4,200 yards, along with 39 touchdowns. Hartman also rushed it in for another 11 scores on the ground as well. And of course, leading receiver A.T. Perry, he also had nearly 1,300 yards receiving, along with 15 touchdowns. Now, they're taking on a VMI team who played little to no defense last year. They allowed over 40 points a game in their final 4 ball games of 2021. They also suffered losses to the likes of Western Carolina, Furman, and East Tennessee State. So I'm going to lean toward the Deacs covering the number. All right, next ball game. Sorry, I keep looking outside. It's kind of dark out there. It looks like it's going to rain or storm. And the trampoline, I don't have it like secured into the ground with stakes, so I hope it doesn't go flying away. But anyway, next matchup looks like a little directional Illinois matchup. I'm talking about Eastern Illinois taking on Northern Illinois, 8 o'clock Thursday. Another one of those games, no line currently posted for it. Now, NIU, Northern Illinois, they won 7 out of their last 10 ball games, and they scored a whole bunch of points in the process. They averaged just about 34 points a game during that time frame, and Rocky Lombardi, he threw for nearly 2,600 yards and had 24 total touchdowns. Now, wide receiver Trayvon Rudolph averaged 17.5 yards per reception and had 7 touchdown catches, so kind of a home run hitter there. Big play Trayvon. I don't think they call him that, but certainly makes an impact when he touches the ball. Now, they're taking on an Eastern Illinois Panther team who lost to the likes of Murray State, Austin Peay, and Southeast Missouri State last year. And aside from winning just 1 game, the Panthers had a real tough time moving the football. They averaged only 14 points a game for the entire year. So I'm going to lean toward the NIU Huskies getting the job done against the number. Next ball game, I think a lot of guys are going to know each other in this one, maybe some cousins, even some brothers. It's going to be Bama A&M taking on UAB, 8 o'clock East. This game's off the board. The Blazers of UAB are coming off a real nice year. They won 6 out of their final 8 ball games, and they scored less than 31 points just once during that span. Now, quarterback Dylan Hopkins, he completed 66% of his passes last year and had 23 total touchdowns. Meanwhile, Dwayne McBride, he was a beast running the football. He rushed for nearly 1,400 yards and averaged over 6.5 yards a carry. And no real surprise here, guys. McBride scored 13 times on the ground. I'm going to lean toward the UAB Blazers getting the job done against the spread. Next ball game might be somewhat competitive, a little bit more competitive than some of the games we already covered. It is going to be Louisiana Tech taking on MIZZOU, 8 o'clock Eastern start time. Of course, that's on Thursday night. Mizzou's minus 19.5, total 60 and a hook. Pretty good two-way action on this one. Not a whole lot of movement with regard to the lines in the early going. The Tigers of Mizzou, they did cover the number in 4 out of their final 5 ball games of 2021. Covers against the likes of Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. They're also going to return defensive back Jalen Charlies, or is it Carlies or Charlies, who had 4 picks, a forced fumble, and 67 total tackles. I think it's Jalen Charlies, but anyway, the Tigers are facing a Louisiana Tech team who lost 8 out of their last 10, and they gave up a whole bunch of points in the process. Now, the Bulldogs allowed over 33 points a game during that span. When it comes to the total, La Tech went 4-0 to the over in their last 4 ball games of the season last year. Meanwhile, Mizzou saw overs last season against the likes of South Carolina, Vanderbilt, and Tennessee. I'm going to lean toward Mizzou minus 19.5, over 60 and a hook. Next matchup, little Big Ten action. Penn State, Purdue, 8 o'clock East. Penn State's minus 3.5 on the road, totals 53 and a hook. Now, public's on the Boilermakers in the under right now. The Nittany Lions, they lost 6 out of their last 8 ball games last year, and they really struggled in Big Ten competition. Now, this Penn State offensive scheme's definitely not built for a track meet. They're taking on a Purdue squad on the other side who's got little issue moving the football. They scored 28 points or more in each of their final 6 games last year. They also put up 40 points in a win against a highly ranked Michigan State team last year. Now, quarterback Aiden O'Connell threw for over 3,700 yards and completed 72% of his passes. And on the defensive side of the ball, Cam Allen had 4 interceptions and 65 tackles from the secondary. Now, total-wise, Purdue saw unders against the likes of Northwestern, Nebraska, and Iowa. Meanwhile, Penn State saw 7 out of their last 9 fall under the line. I'm going to lean toward Purdue plus 3.5, keeping this one close. And the under, 53 and a hook. Next ball game, New Mexico State taking on Minnesota, 9 o'clock East. Minnesota's laying 36.5 points, totals 54. Now, most bettors do like the Gophers and the under in this one. Heavy movement toward the under, 2.5-point move since this one opened. And even though Minnesota's clearly better, I'm just not so sure they have the offensive firepower to cover this number. They scored 23 points or less in 4 out of their final 5 games last year. And as experienced as quarterback Tanner Morgan is, he completed just 59% of his passes last year, and he threw for only 10 touchdowns. Matter of fact, Morgan's second leading receiver last year didn't even have 400 receiving yards. Now they're taking on a New Mexico State team who played really tough against Nevada in the opener this year. Defensive back Bryce Jackson, he also had 8 tackles and a PBU. Now when it comes to the total, the Aggies opener did fall about 13 points below the posted total. Meanwhile, the Gophers on the other side, they saw unders in 6 out of their last 10 outings themselves. I'm going to lean toward New Mexico State plus 36.5, under 54. Next ball game I have for you, it is going to be Northern Arizona taking on Arizona State, 10 o'clock Eastern start time. No line set for this game, but regardless of where it opens up at, the Sun Devils, they should be able to get it done. They've got a solid defense led by Kyle Sowell, who had 82 tackles last year. As a matter of fact, this ASU defense finished the season last year with 16 picks and 5 fumble recoveries. And they're taking on a Northern Arizona team who had a tough time slowing down their opponents last year. They gave up 30 points or more in their final 6 ball games of 2021. I'm going to lean toward the Arizona State Sun Devils getting the job done against the spread. Next ball game, Portland State taking on San Jose State. And that's going to be a 10:30 Eastern kickoff on Thursday. No line currently set for this game. And even though Spartans should be heavily favored in this one, I'm not so certain they'll be able to cover a really big number. These guys lost 5 out of their last 7 ball games last year. They scored only 18 points a game on average during that time frame. They're also taking on a Portland State team on the other side of things who actually had little issue moving the football last year. I know they're an FCS school, but they were certainly good offensively. The Vikings averaged over 33 points a game in their final 6 contests. I just think this number is going to open up maybe a little bit too high here for the Spartans. On the other side, I think Portland State should be able to keep it close. I don't think they're going to win it, but they could keep it within a couple of scores. So I'm going to take Portland State plus the points. All right, next matchup, Cal Poly taking on Fresno State, 10:30 p.m. East. Of course, we do not have a number yet for this game, but once again, another one of those games, this number is going to be pretty high if they actually put one out for it. Fresno did win 8 out of their final 10 ball games last year, and they moved the ball consistently in the process. Now, Jake Haener threw for nearly 4,100 yards along with 33 touchdowns. And aside from completing nearly 68% of his passes, the quarterback also ran it into the end zone 3 times. Now, Haener's favorite target, Jalen Cropper, he's also back for his senior season. He caught 85 balls last year and scored 13 total touchdowns. Meanwhile, defensively, you're going to want to look out for David Perales, who led the Bulldogs with 7 sacks and 3 forced fumbles last year. He's going to be tough to block. Look for a lot of double teams on him. A lot of tight ends chipping down, maybe a little running back help. Anyway, they're taking on a Cal Poly team who lost to the likes of Northern Arizona, Sacramento State, and Portland State last year. And as a matter of fact, the Mustangs scored 21 points or less in 8 out of their final 9 ball games. This one should probably be a massacre. I'm going to lean toward Hainer and the Bulldogs of Fresno State, covering this number, however large it is.